Now, our next guest once held one of the most powerful jobs in the country. Alan Shatter was Minister for Justice for 3 years until 2014, but he is also a very successful lawyer.
But behind that success lay a secret personal life that was shaped by a terrible tragedy. And Alan's new book, Life is a Funny Business, a very personal story. It's a very, very compelling read, and Alan has decided to come and join us here in Cork, and we're absolutely thrilled to have you on the couch, Alan.
Well, I'm happy to be here, yeah.
Yes. Where'd you cooking, where'd you doing all these things? I know you for a long time, but I never realised the tragedy of the fact that your mother died and you found her. Carbon monoxide poisoning. She turned on the gas in 1965, just coming up to Christmas.
It was, it was around that time, and I was only 14 years of age, and up to the age of 10, as I write in the book, I'd had a fairly idyllic childhood, and she became unwell when I was around 10 and a half, and there were huge personal difficulties she had. And as a child, I never understood why. And unfortunately, she eventually took her own life, and I found her on the kitchen floor.
That must have been unbelievable.
As a 14-year-old child?
Yes, as a 14-year-old child.
Alan,
yeah.
she suffered with depression, but I know you write in your book that it's only afterwards you realise she suffered with anorexia as well.
Yeah.
And did this come on her? Because she was only, I didn't realise, she was only 40 years old when she passed away.
She had, I mean, I remember her from my very young days as a very exuberant, vivacious,
beautiful-looking woman.
Personality.
Yeah.
And my home, as I was growing up from the age of sort of like 0 to 10, was a very secure, safe, happy place.
We're just looking at you there, Bambino.
Yeah, and I never really understood what triggered her difficulties. But she suffered from depression. She was in and out of hospitals. And I remember my father pleading with her to eat more food. And she went from the beautiful person you can see in that photo to literally a skeleton. Yeah. And I've no doubt she was suffering from anorexia. You're talking the early 60s. No one understood anorexia.
No one spoke
Tragically,
about it.
in those days, no one knew what to do about it. I think probably she would have been treated very differently today than she was in those days. And eventually she was overcome by her whole circumstance.
Yeah. This happened to you when you were 14. How did you go on with your own life then, as a teenager into your 20s, with seeing that at the age of 14?
Well, I think I coped with it firstly because for the 4 years before it happened, I knew she was unwell. She was in and out of hospitals. I was visiting her all the time with my dad. We talked about her illness a lot. And after the dreadful tragedy of her death, we talked a huge amount.
Your dad seemed like a lovely man.
Yeah, and I understood that this happened because she was unwell. I didn't see it, as some teenagers understandably do, in personal terms. I didn't perceive her as abandoning me or any of the...
You didn't see it as your fault?
No, I didn't either. I think it was because we talked so much and the close relationship between myself and my father that I came through it. But as I describe in the book, the great tragedy was he never really came to terms with it. And he did an extraordinary job, I think, looking back on it now with me. I may not have understood it at the time, but his life for the rest of his days was blighted by what happened.
And did you find being an only child, it was more difficult for you, or do you feel that, you know, did you go out into the world and make friends easier, or did this kind of hold you back in any way?
No, I think to some degree I sought to escape from what was happening. So I was a sports-mad child prior to my mother's death and a great reader of books. And I just became more sports-mad and lost myself in sport and in reading. And from, I suppose, doing reasonably well in school for a few years, I did very poorly in school, but that's because I decided to read what I found interesting, not what the teachers were telling me to read. So in a strange way, I sort of got on with things. And I suppose... for your own self-protection, I think looking back on it, I probably put some of this into the back of my mind. And try to focus on the future rather than the past.
Yeah.
Did grandmother move in at one stage then, did she?
She did. She was a very strange and weird personality, and I write about her in the book. I don't want to spoil the book for anyone, but frankly, looking back on it, would have been a lot better off if she hadn't.
Yeah.
I think that's the simplest way. The simplest way of describing it. Yeah.
You decided to go down the law route, and you became a very successful lawyer, as we know, and have achieved great things, especially when it comes to family law. It's still the authority, Shatter's family law.
Little out of date.
Well, yeah, but still, it's the book that everyone talks about. Anyone that studied law will know that.
Yeah.
Why law?
Why law? I think I literally came from this, what I describe as a caricature Jewish family, where your parents take the view and encourage you to either be a lawyer or a doctor. And I think it was taken for granted that Alan one day would go to college and be a lawyer or a doctor. Mind you, I must have, in the lead-in to my, what was then the Intercert, now the Junior Cert, raised some doubts about that because I wasn't doing too well in school exams during that time. But in the end, I chose law, and again in the book, Life is a Funny Business, I explain why and what my insights were at the time. And I'm glad I did. I think
you're just successful and still have a career.
I enjoyed the work I did as a lawyer, though on occasions I was dealing with people whose families had broken down, who were very stressed and very traumatised. But trying to help them come through that was also rewarding.
Is it fair to say you fell into politics accidentally?
I think to a degree, yeah. It was my work in the free legal advice centres, seeing how out-of-date laws were, how badly treated battered wives were, unsupported wives, the awful uselessness at the time of our childcare laws and services. I became very much an activist for social reform, and having spent a number of years trying to persuade politicians in Leinster House to do what was necessary, and discovering most of them weren't that interested, I decided to see could I achieve some of the changes required from the inside rather than looking at it from the outside.
And in Europe as well. I mean, you took a lot of cases there. And
we did. We had an interesting case many years ago in Europe. We had a number that my law firm did, but one of the biggest, I think, was in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, which was called the Married Women's Tax case.
Which changed everything for women.
Yeah, at the time, if two people, man and woman, were cohabiting, and if they had an identical income to a married couple, the cohabitees paid less tax than the married couple. And we thought that discriminated against married couples and took a very successful court case. That particular court case was resolved at Supreme Court level, but then there was one that followed on from it about the social welfare system that achieved a very good result in the European Court.
Totally, which is great. When you think of your career in politics, and you were a long time there, you achieved an awful lot, and then the way it ended, which was a very tumultuous year for you in 2014. You know, would you look back now and say, and I know you've said, you know, you weren't treated fairly, and I know you've said also, you know, you did everything by the book, and it's been proven that way. But would you ever consider going back there again, or have you closed that door firmly behind you?
Well, that particular year was a very bizarre experience. Yes. There were three major, what were described as Garda-related controversies, about which I told entirely the truth, set out exactly what I knew about the issues, and found it didn't matter what I did or said. I was being accused of telling lies, of covering up. And it took 2.5 years of 3 different judicial inquiries, 2 statutory investigations, one what we call a non-statutory inquiry. At the end of it, it was established I told the truth. I did nothing wrong.
But that's too late then when you're in politics, is it?
And by the time the final report was published, I'd lost my Dáil seat. And I've no doubt that people still who haven't read the reports believe some of what was said about me. It was a very difficult and stressful period for me and my wife Carol and our family. Would I get back into politics? I would totally confess that I don't miss a lot of what goes on in politics. I've no interest in being a member of Leinster House or a minister in government for any status reason. What I do miss is the opportunity to address issues that I think could be better addressed. And
the platform you had.
And my difficulty is today I see things happening that really annoy me, that I think could be better dealt with. And you have
so yes, you might go back.
Frankly, I think it's unlikely, but I'm not ruling it out.
Now, when this lady came to Ireland, there was a bomb scare. We never heard about this, did we?
The Queen in Dublin Castle?
No, There was 1 or 2 odd events happened during that period. That was me in the Garden of Remembrance. on her first day of her official visit in Leinster House. And the following day, there was a big dinner in Dublin Castle. And all the good and the great were there. And I was sitting at a table with Martin Callanan, then Garda Commissioner, and the Chief of Staff of the Defence Forces. And my daughter Kelly was there. My wife Carol couldn't be there because, ironically, she was playing golf in England in a competition. Just as the Queen and President McAleese were about to deliver a speech, a message came in that an anonymous caller said that the Dublin Castle was going to be bombed. And the castle had been locked down. The army and the Garda Síochána had done a fantastic job in securing, locking down the castle. No one was allowed gain entrance after the securities had been checked until the event took place. And we were waiting for the Queen and President McAleese to speak. We were very conscious throughout that visit that there was a need to ensure proper security, but also to ensure hoax bomb calls didn't disrupt the event.
Yeah.
So a decision had to be speedily made. And it was made that we believed it was a hoax bomb call. The then Assistant Commissioner was Noreen O'Sullivan. We asked that a check be made at the Castle building. And as the speeches were being delivered, it was confirmed to us there was no bomb in the building. The building was secure. And ironically, when I was writing that book in November of last year, the very month I was referring to this issue, an individual was convicted in the courts for making that phone call. But also, interestingly, explosives were found in his home.
That's true. So, so you have to be aware. And there's so much more in this book. It's really, really good. I mean, life is a funny business, a very personal story. And some lovely photos as well. Thank you so much for coming down to us. And I know you're heading off now. We are running out the door to Liam Russell's bookshop here on Oliver Plunkett Street in Cork. And you're signing the book.
Signing,
He'll be there in about 4 minutes' time.
Yeah.
He's there until about 6:30. Thanks, Alan.
Alan, thanks very much. Now,